Hi, everybody. It's Brian Stevens. We're going to start in about another 30 seconds. Let people start, like we do every day, kind of getting on the roll. But I like to always start on time. You know this if you joined us, so that we can end promptly. And we really value your time. And I really appreciate you coming on board to learn. As always, especially on this session, questions are going to be great. I've already, when I put out that we're going to have an employment lawyer on to answer your questions in a live fire type exercise, I've already had people starting to send some questions in. If you've got questions, don't forget you can kind of wiggle your mouse. You'll get a toolbar that will show up at the bottom and it says Q&A. I'm going to click mine right now and put it over here. I bet Dottie will start sending in some awesome questions here pretty quickly. So if you start to think about employment law questions today, while we're getting into the meat of it, I'd like to get to as many as we can in the time allocated. So Alan's going to be on here. Don't softball anything. Really, you can be really aggressive and try to put him on his heels. That's always kind of a fun game for lawyers, putting them on their heels. So what do we got going on today? Let me try to get all this stuff organized, and it is definitely time to start. So hi, I'm Brian Stevens with Case of Public Strategies. We specialize in specialized, unique communications when you're trying to influence somebody and kind of get them to do something. So we run a lot of campaigns. I'm also on the board of the chamber, and I think we're getting some really good results. Amy Daniels here. She's never going to come on the screen with you. She's literally sitting in a closet right now out of her house that she turned into a home office. It's kind of cool. And so she's helping to put on this with our friends at Waddell and Associates, who's helping to produce all this for us. So thank you to that. We're going to keep going to every Thursday from now on for a while and keep providing the content that you asked for, that we think you need. So every noon Friday, we're going to keep doing this. Next week, I think we have Signal. I'll talk about that at the end coming on. So first person this wouldn't be possible with is our members at the chamber, but also our sponsors. iBank. Jeff he's been on before, Jeff Kimbrough with iBank. So Jeff, I hope everything's going well over there. Thanks for joining us. I know you saw that I was a moderator again, and you're like, oh no, but tell us what's going on, and thanks again for your sponsorship.
Hey, Brian, you know we love you as moderator. Good afternoon, guys. I'm Jeff Kimbrough with Independent Bank, and as sponsor, we are extremely grateful that you guys are able to join us today. One thing I love about this organization is our ability to serve our clients. In recent months, our community has experienced unforeseen change. Business owners with the stress of making necessary change to cope with this COVID-19 pandemic. As a banker, it's extremely important for us to be that resource to help our clients put those feelings at ease. Responsibility, shared community, these are some of the things that we care about. These are some of the things that help us serve our clients heroically. So today, we have the pleasure to hear from attorney Alan Crone as he speaks on some of those changes to our work environment from COVID-19. And I look forward to hearing this topic. So again, thank you for joining us. And if any of us at Independent Bank can be a resource to you or your business, let's connect. Thank you guys, and stay safe.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. And I can't highlight the fact that iBank is allowing everyone, even non-members of the chamber, to join this. So once again, share this. It'll be recorded. It'll be out next week on the chamber website. That your chamber representative can get you a copy of it to share with everybody. Jeff always likes to send it out to his team. So thanks, Jeff. And you can share it out too and invite others. We want to really, the chamber wants to provide as much good content to help people through these. I'm going to be careful about my word choice here. I don't want to say challenging times or questionable times. Look, during this disruptive times, and we're going to navigate and get through it. And so that's why we want to bring you this great content. So let's talk about Alan Crone. Now, Alan Crone is a long-term buddy of mine, and there's kind of a big joke going on. And Alan, if you want to go and unmute yourself and turn your screen on so I can talk about you to your face for a second, that would be great. And if I can get Jeff to make sure to mute his, well, he has muted. I'm not sure. Laney's probably playing with it. He'll come up in a second if he's not on already. So Alan Crone's an employment lawyer, but we could have talked all about politics with Alan. There's a joke in political circles in Memphis, Shelby County. Alan's rules on politics. His fifth rule, his eighth rule, and this has been baked into society for like 20 years right now. So I was like, well, that violates Alan's eighth rule on politics. So it's kind of funny. I could have talked about Memphis history. He's a long-term Memphian. But that didn't seem right either. Really, the thing that I thought you needed the most is employment law. And he's such a good lawyer. This is how good of a lawyer he is. He's my lawyer. Now, that means he's kept me out of trouble. And so think about how much trouble I probably get into and the fact that I'm still around. So like, what a great lawyer, right? And my wife's a lawyer too, but he's my lawyer that I go to, right? Now, lots of great lawyers in town. Alan will bring a real flavor that can tie in what's going on in some of these political circles, what the governments are doing with the law. He'll kind of have a little bit of a forefront on where the government's going, because there's so many government rules out there that are going to influence the liability issues and how we handle opening up. So I thought that he was really the right employment lawyer to talk to today, even though there's so many awesome ones out there. So Alan has agreed to kind of a rapid fire back and forth. So if you haven't submitted a question, I'd like to overwhelm him with more questions he can get to. So Alan, really appreciate it. His law firm is the Crone law firm right here in Memphis. And so if you need an employment lawyer, he's a great one to go to. But let's get right into the meat of what we're here for. And if you've got questions, go and hit that button. So Alan, thanks for being here. And I'm going to, give you the first volley. I'd like you to explain, and once again, really appreciate everyone being patient. If there's a little bit of lag time back and forth and we talk over each other, you guys know how Zoom and all these things work right now. And so Alan, tell us what's going on with these phases and how these reopening of phase one, we're in phase two now, I guess, is how you think that's going to impact businesses, and give us a little primer on that so we know what's going on.
Well, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind when you talk about the phases is this is a multilateral endeavor that we're engaged in, particularly from a business owner standpoint. I get a lot of calls from business owners who, and we're going to talk about some of these questions, what should I do about masks? What should I do about this and that? And whose responsibility is it? And one place where I start from is it really is everybody's responsibility. Everybody has a responsibility to help us navigate where we are with regard to the phases and reopening and that sort of thing. Businesses have a role to play, customers have a role to play, and employees have a role to play. So right now we're in the second phase of reopening. I was talking to Mayor Strickland and he said, closing down was really easy. We just closed. Opening up is a lot more difficult because there had to be a lot of coordination among, in Shelby County, you have the county health department, the county government, the city government, and then all the municipal governments. And they've all worked together, I think, in an incredible way. Republicans and Democrats, inner city, suburbanites have all kind of worked together to come up with the plan that we're in the middle of right now. We've also coordinated with the state that's had its own challenges. So as many people know, the first phase, we opened restaurants and retail to 50%. We're still asking everybody to wear masks, to socially distance, to wash your hands, all those sorts of things. And the big difference between phase one and phase two is gatherings of up to 50 people are now allowed. What the governor calls close contact industries are now fully open. In the first phase, barbershops and salons that did hair were able to open to do hair only. And you still have to wear masks. Both parties have to wear masks, and there's sanitation and sanitizing requirements. Most of those requirements are still in place. Restaurants are still at 50%. Although now, if you've got a restaurant with a bar, you can now sit at the bar socially distanced. Before you couldn't sit at the bar. And those close contact businesses are now open. So Brian, you can now get your nails done. You can't get a facial because you have to keep your mask on. You can get a tattoo. So if you've been putting off that University of Memphis AAC football championship tattoo, you can now do that. Also some other non-contact sports, some other venues are being able to be open, and the Gyms are able to go to 50%. All of this is on the city and county's website, so you can go and look if you've got a particular question about your particular industry or business. Now, having said all of that, the other thing I think is interesting about reopening, our positive testing rate is generally good. If you look back over the last 2 to 3 weeks, particularly, we've increased, there have been some days we've increased testing, which has increased positive test results, but our percentage of test results, positive results, has started to go down. Now, one of the troubling statistics we've seen over the last week is there has been a slight rise in hospitalizations due to COVID, and there's been a rise in ICU bed occupancy. And the last time I checked, there was no hard data on exactly what was causing that. So that's the number ultimately. Now, a lot of the doctors don't like it when I say this, but to me, that's the ultimate metric, is are people going to the hospital? Because the testing is very, very important to do the testing. The testing is important because that identifies where the new cases are. But the real danger is that we get where Manhattan was a month or so ago, where there are no beds, there are no ventilators, there's no ICU available for people. So that's what the health department is really monitoring. That's what everybody's monitoring across the board. The big problem is it takes 2 weeks for this, or longer, for this really for the trend really to develop. And so the phases are designed if to be able to test what remedial mitigation efforts are working and what's not, and where they are and are not geographically and demographically, so that if we start to have outbreaks, we can get a hold of them very quickly.
So just to frame everybody, Alan has what, I guess it's called insider knowledge, but it's not insider knowledge, that it's not private, but he was special counsel to our Mayor Jim Strickland for 5 years?
4 years, yes.
Or 4 years. I forget, time flies when you're having fun. I feel like poor Alan drew the short straw out of his kitchen cabinet, got him elected, and had to go down and advise and take time from his personal life and his law firm to do that. So thanks for that service. So Alan does have kind of a feel for where things are going. So now I know we don't know if we'll have to shut back down. I don't really want to get into all the predictive analysis. I want to make sure we drift into the liability issues, but I do kind of want to stay right around this government approach. So we just had one question of gatherings of 50 people are allowed. So can we have wedding receptions? Can we have, how does this social event type? I saw that Gold Strike in Tunica was going to be one of the first casinos that are going to open nationally. Can people plan a wedding in June, July, August? Should they? What do you think from a kind of a political side, not an employment law, but a political side, or should that just don't put any deposits down because it might get dumped? What do you think? Well,
I think that's the, how much risk are you willing to take? Yeah, if you've got wedding receptions, that's a great question, because it's not as simple as, oh yeah, go have a wedding reception. Where are you going to have the wedding reception? If you're going to have the wedding reception in a room that's designed to hold 50 people, then you're not going to be able to socially distance. Don't forget that the groups that are allowed to assemble, you have to be able to assemble with social distance, 6 feet apart, all of those kinds of things, maybe masks, etc. So if you've got a room that would hold 400 people and you're going to have 50 people at your wedding reception, then you may want to go ahead. You would probably be legally able to do that. Now, the question is, how much fun is that going to be if you can't dance, if you can't really gather together and that sort of thing? This thing breeds, feeds, and spreads in crowds, and not just crowds. As a lot of people talk about the grocery store. Well, my favorite is, well, I want to go to church, but you won't let me go to church, but you let me go to the grocery store. Well, that's true. At the grocery store, you're not spending confined time with the same people for an hour. And that's the big difference.
Well, Alan, you hit a couple key things that I definitely want to get into is one, if you're going to plan an event, you better factor in social distancing. But you said the problem is right now there's no laws that ban me from having a room with 100 people in it. Now, there's a lot of recommendations. And on the state and the city level, the city council, county commissioner are thinking about passing some bills, but they're only recommendations because they can't stop me, right? Talk a little bit about where we actually are legally about these gatherings.
I'm going to talk about just Memphis, Shelby County, Tennessee. But the city administration takes the position that code enforcement can enforce the safer at home, stay at home ordinance, or excuse me, decree, and the requirements that come out of that. The Department of Health can issue citations as well, and in theory get an injunction. Both could get an injunction to prohibit certain activity. And there is some question about the enforceability of that. And that's, it's been 100 years since we've had a pandemic like this, and a lot of these things are untested. You're absolutely right. And from a business standpoint, I think what kind of look do you want to have? I mean, this is a chamber audience, and whether or not I have a wedding reception for my daughter is one thing. But if I'm going to engage in an activity like that may or may not be legal, do I want to engage in something where from a PR standpoint, where a guy like Brian Stevens comes in, do I want to be known as the business that is a hotbed for COVID because I'm not TCBing on the requirements? And I think that's a whole other element that you put on it is your customers want to be safe and your employees want to be safe. And the ramifications, if either or both of those groups don't feel safe or actually are not safe, both legally and practically.
Well, and let's take it from the perspective of I have the entertainment venue. I have the bar, I have the wedding chapel, I have the place that wants to do the reception. I've got to pay employees. I got to get things back on the books. I mean, I've got things I got to do to get my company running. I mean, what advice would you give them just based on, now this is a disclaimer for everyone, snapshot in time as of today, everything moves so fast, May 21st, the snapshot in time, which it could change in a couple of weeks, but what should they start opening up if they can figure out the parameters for this or not?
Well, I think so, if they can figure out the parameters, and of course it depends on what business you have. I think the successful businesses right now are the ones that are looking at what they normally do, what they've done traditionally, and putting what I call a COVID spin on it, innovating it to figure out a way that they can make money and comply with the reality that we all find ourselves in. Every restaurant has the same problem in terms of the same requirements. And the ones that are prevailing right now are the ones that have figured out a way from an innovative standpoint in their own way how to do this. Some restaurants have decided even after they could open up, look, we're going to kill it with curbside and delivery. We're going to turn our servers into delivery people, and we're going to morph the way we deliver our services. I know there's a restaurant in town, kind of a high-end restaurant that is packaging their dinners that are partially cooked and prepared, and then doing online cooking classes so that you can prepare your meal and have that experience at home. It's not the same experience, but it's a different experience. And I think so if I owned an event center, I would start to think, okay, who are my customers? What do they want? And how can I deliver an experience to them that is consistent with social distancing, but also adds value to their event and lets them have the best COVID wedding reception that they can have under the circumstances?
Yeah, and I think so. So I always like to, I know you've watched every one of these since I've been doing them. I know you've seen how I've done it every single time. You would never miss me. I get it, right? I like to make sure I'm wrapping up my takeaways. So one of the takeaways is, look, plan your businesses for social distancing, and that the code enforcement law could come down on you if you breach it. So start to develop your business line and be prepared to do that for some time and start to map out some strategies around that. Okay, awesome. Let's start talking about liability. I've gotten several questions about liability. I'm going to kind of work you through several different hypothetical situations, all right? And so the first one is liability, what if I have employees that don't want to wear mask? But they say, I don't want to wear a mask. Now, I'm not talking about customers yet. I'm just talking about employees, and they're saying, I don't want to wear a mask. Can we do anything about that?
Well, I think of all the groups that we've talked about, employees are the easiest for a company to deal with. If someone says, I don't want to wear a mask, then you say, okay, you've got two choices. You can either wear a mask and work here, or you cannot work here. It can be as simple as that. All of these orders, whether the state, the local, the county, they all require employees. I'm going to say the vast majority of employees that have contact with the public and each other to wear masks. That's the number one area of defense. And so if somebody didn't want to do that, then that's their choice. They don't have to do it, but the ramification is they don't have a job anymore. And the other part of that is, now with the law, it's never that easy, right, Brian? Now there may be some people that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, they need a reasonable accommodation on the masks, and maybe that accommodation is one of those clear shields. Maybe one of those accommodations, depending upon their work environment, is to isolate them, assuming that there's a medical reason to do so. And you can have what the law calls an interactive conversation, an interactive process with that person to determine if it's a bona fide medical condition, and then what the reasonable accommodation is. And if one of those two things isn't true, generally speaking, then there may be a bigger problem about compliance, and you have to go forward from there. But people say to me all the time, well, this is no worse than the flu. True on certain levels, except the flu hasn't shut down the meatpacking industry in a long time. And the meatpacking industry is a good example of what happens when a job site doesn't observe this social distancing, doesn't make people wear masks, doesn't worry about sanitizing. Huge percentages of your workforce are at home sick, and you're dead in the water. And to me, from a business standpoint, of all the things we've endured, that to me is the doomsday scenario, at least in my law firm. I mean, I can't afford to have a half or 75% of my billing attorneys at home sick for 2 to 4 weeks.
So
so it's not just a matter of, oh, I don't want to wear a mask. I mean, it is a existential imperative for that business to make sure that its employees and customers are safe and healthy.
Yeah, and I think that, outside of the moral and ethical obligations we have to our fellow humankind out here, I make the decision to wear a mask so that if I get it, I don't bring it to somebody else. I mean, that, everyone's got to make their own call, but yeah. So another thing jumped out at me. Okay, so one, yes, if you so choose to require everyone to wear a mask, then you can do that unless there's an exception for one of those, based on a disability. Now, this brings me to think, so back in my former life, I was an employment lawyer and used to litigate some of these things. And I know the biggest danger for companies to have inconsistency in requirements. So you let one group of people do it and one group of people not do it. And can you kind of reflect upon the dangers of how that could unroll into a potential discrimination lawsuit?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And yeah, so if you're not consistent with the application of that policy, and having an exception for someone with a disability is not being inconsistent, because that's what the law requires. And if someone says, well, hey, Brenda gets to wear a face shield, why can't I wear a face shield? Then you either say, okay, you can wear a face shield. Everybody can either wear a mask or a face shield, or, well, Brenda's doing that because of a particular situation. You need to wear your face mask, and you just have to draw that line. And so that's why it's imperative that if someone doesn't have an exception like that you've got to draw the line, and you can't have somebody who is just perceived to be more valuable or perceived to be, for for whatever reason, you say, well, okay, Bob and Sue, they don't have to wear them because Crone really likes them and he's not enforcing the rules against them. And so if Bob and Sue happen to be white and John and Amy are African American, then they may say, well, it's because they're white and we're black, and then now you've got a racial situation. Or maybe it's Bob and Jim and Betty and Sue, and so then it becomes a gender issue. So the only winning move is to be consistent.
Yeah, so I think that the big takeaway here is have a rule, have it consistent with everybody, including the leaders. And if somebody needs an exception to that for some reason, it's time to call a lawyer. It's time to, if it's a religious belief, if it's a potential disability issue, you need to kind of refine that and be aware of that. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, now let's turn to customers. All right, and I also want to get to partner organizations and vendors. We're going to get to lots of things. Let's assume a customer doesn't want to wear a mask. And I think we've seen this on the national media. Violation of my rights. I find it odd when you can have a sign outside that says no shirt, no shoes, no service. Why can't you have a sign that says no shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service? Constitutionally, it's really, I think people get the Constitution and their freedoms with private business enterprise convoluted. But let's pretend like we're running a retail store and somebody doesn't want to come with a mask. What can I do as a manager or owner of a small company?
Well, you can definitely ask them to leave. And I saw a report this morning on the news where a large chain, a manager was asking a guy to leave, and the guy said, well, I woke up this morning in a free country. Well, that's true. He did wake up this morning in a free country, but it's not the government telling him he can't wear, he has to wear a mask in that store. It is the store saying you have to wear a mask in our store. And that's exactly right. A business says you have to wear a mask, then you have to wear a mask, and your remedy is to ask them to leave. And if you're large enough to have security, you can have security remove them. And I think the vast majority of people, in terms of what's the business ramification for that, I think right now the vast majority of people will appreciate it. Because again, as you pointed out, Brian, the mask requirement isn't for the mask wearer, it's for other people. It mainly is to prevent the spread from someone who's asymptomatic and is coughing or sneezing or just talking from spreading the virus, as opposed to I'm wearing a mask because I don't want to contract the virus. I think both of those are effective, but the biggest reason to wear it proactively is it's not a sign of fear, it's a sign of respect and courtesy.
Well, and I can't teach people to be respectful or fearful. I'm just thinking about the person that walks into, that wants to come into the wedding reception, and the wedding establishment, since that's our hypothetical right now, are saying you've got to wear a mask, you got to stay a spot, you got to rent the 300 room facility for 50 people, all those parameters, and then people violate it, right? Is it they're not going to be able to educate them on not being however they are. The question is, from a legal perspective, they can say, you have to leave, or we're gonna have to kind of call the police. That's what you're saying is probably a good rule of thumb, and that's a requirement. It's always funny when somebody says, you can't infringe on my right for freedom of speech. Yeah, I can. I'm not the government. Right, it's the government that can't do these things, not individuals. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about liability. If somebody, and this can be an employee or a customer, and they get the coronavirus and maybe something disastrous happens, who do they, I can see people suing. Some states are going to be taking up legislation to provide some sort of immunity thing. We don't have that yet in Tennessee. And if somebody gets, we don't know where they catch it, but let's assume they sue us because they say, I was only around your group, you had an employee get it, and now I've got it and I'm sick and I want to sue you. What's going to happen with all these liability issues around getting it in and around our companies?
Well, I think there'll be a fair amount of attempts to bring lawsuits. I think it remains to be seen what the courts are going to do with that. As a lawyer, my first question is, all right, causation. How are you going to prove that you caught the coronavirus on my property? Let's say it's a customer, that's going to be a problem. Now, the way that the plaintiff lawyers might get around that is if I'm a business owner and I'm not complying with the various orders of the state or the county health department, that could be negligence per se, violation of a state or federal regulation. And that may be the theory as well. You know, this was a wedding reception. I went to the wedding reception. There were 3 people there not wearing masks. The wedding reception company did not enforce that. They didn't have plexiglass up. They didn't enforce social distancing. It was a petri dish, and that's where I got the coronavirus. And I gave it to my 95-year-old mother, and she died as a result. So, you know, to me, that's another reason to comply with the orders, is it could be used against you later on. I think there are lots of problems with those lawsuits, but that's not going to stop people from bringing them.
Well, it's interesting. The question was, can a business be sued? Well, the answer is yes. A business can be sued for anything. Now, the question is, if you were to get sued, how do you get out of the lawsuit as quick as possible, as cheaply as possible, and navigate your way out of it? You got to kind of also be thinking about that. But I think you can also block a potential lawsuit if you're following a lot of parameters. They see a lot of parameters and they think, there's just no way I caught it there because I followed all these guidelines and rules, and I also give the appearance of a lot of structure. So even if you're going to put on the real question is, let's assume you have a wedding and you're the person that's paying for the wedding, not just the wedding reception hall. They can all be sued. I mean, you as a person paying for it that invited people can be sued. Doesn't mean you have to pay anything. It's just a big pain in the butt to pay all these lawyers, right? Terrible lawyer fees out there. And so if you're following all these parameters, at least our recommendation is that will kind of that'll protect you, and maybe they'll go find another easier person to sue that didn't follow all these parameters. So great point, Alan, to really bake in protocols. And so if you're having the wedding, or if you're the place that owns the wedding, you ought to be following these protocols to protect you, and you ought to make sure that everybody's in compliance, and maybe even you have some documents signed, some waivers. I have a massage therapist because I run my bike so much. She had a waiver and a disclaimer thing. It was quick. It was easy. I signed it. It was pretty smart, and let me know what the rules are. If I'm gonna get her to provide service, I've got to have a mask. I got to relay that I've not been around anyone with the virus. I don't have a fever, things like that. So, hey, this question, can I do the fever thing? Can I take people's temperature, Alan? I mean, my wife is a HIPAA lawyer. She does not necessarily like people breaching, like, you know, things about health. So can I require both employees and or patrons before they come in can I ask them a question? Can I say, you've been around anybody with coronavirus? How far can I stretch this, Alan? Can I take their temperatures?
Well, the state guidelines and the county guidelines require that you do those very things, both for employees and customers as they enter your business. If you're an office or if you're a restaurant, those kind of places are doing that with the touchless thermometer. And I agree with your wife. There are HIPAA concerns for that. But again, you're not necessarily, you know, then the question is, you know, is the fact that I have a fever, is that covered under HIPAA? And that's a little outside my pay grade right now as I sit here. But you certainly can do that. I wouldn't keep records of it, but if someone has a 100-degree fever, then you can bar them from entering your establishment. And I think that's going on all across the country. I know it's going on all across the state. I was on the call with the governor's economic recovery group, and they were talking. Commissioner Waddell was talking about Dollywood and some of these attractions in East Tennessee are doing that very thing. Some of them are giving out masks. You can't get in without a mask, and we're gonna take your temperature, and we're gonna ask you those questions. And if you answer one of the questions wrong, then we're gonna ask that they're gonna bar you from entering the property, hopefully in a nice way.
And so once again, I think you're right about, so I did police this with my HIPAA lawyer wife, and you know, there a lot of lawyers are giving advice on those kind of fronts and saying yes. Now, once again, consistency I still think is key. You can't test some people and not test everyone. So don't start anything unless you can just do a blanket coverage, or it's going to start to look like there's a problem. Are there any actual Shelby County guidelines on this from the health department on what you can do or should do regarding checking temperatures, and where can we find that?
There are, if you, in fact, I was looking for it the other day, and I just Googled back to business framework, Shelby County, Tennessee, and that takes you right to the website. I know that the city has those up, and the county health department has them up, and you can even dive down into the specific regulations for specific industries. As you said, massage therapists are that's part of the close contact, and they have to keep a record of when you go in, they want your name, address, and phone number, so that if the guy in front of you tests positive, and you share, another hour later, they can contact you and say, hey, you need to be tested because somebody else that was in your chain of commerce, you may have been exposed that way. So there's lots of contact tracing that's going on that way. And there are lots of rules and regulations that we're all going to have to live with for, the foreseeable future.
So, Alan, I want to give one kind of quick one. And once again, I think so much of this is, Alan and I come at this from an employment law standpoint, trying to avoid lawsuits, trying to win lawsuits. People can sue for anything, but if you're consistent across the board, you follow the requirements that are, and you can Google back to work Shelby County and find those sites. So great, thank you. One person asked, can businesses require to just take, like apps or credit cards only and not take cash, because cash is kind of dirty? And I was thinking about that quite a bit. There's some demographic groups don't have access to as many apps and things like that. So I don't know, is that any kind of concern right now, Alan?
No, I've seen it both ways, to be honest with you. I was in a place the other day that only took cash because they didn't want to handle credit cards. So I think you've got to be sensitive to your customer base. And I think you're right. There are demographic groups and groups of folks that, if you serve a lower income group, that's probably an all cash business. If you're higher end, you're probably safe with credit cards. But I think being consistent and having a non-discriminatory, if you will, reason for it, that you can justify is the reason to do it. And if you decide not to, then okay, well, I've got to decide, okay, what is the hygienic way I'm going to handle cash? And so make sure that everybody's wearing gloves and that you're sanitizing the areas and whatnot. I don't think there's any one right way to do it or wrong way to do it, other than you want to make sure you're doing the minimum possible of the guidelines. Okay. And as far as I know, the guidelines do not speak to cash versus credit versus apps and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm hearing is, like, once again, just be consistent. Don't allow men to give you cash, but women can't do it. I mean, that's gender discrimination potentially. I mean, so just be aware of all that when you're out there in the world. So I want to keep talking about this liability issue just a little bit more. So I'm going to take Scott Brockman's question. I'm going to turn it back into our wedding reception hall example. Of a lot of times companies have tenants or partner groups, vendors that they outsource things to. Let's assume you're doing everything tight. You've got your guidelines. You're like mask, 6 feet, no fewer than 50 people spread out, and you're just super pro and you're doing everything right. But you have a vendor or a tenant that's not. How should you handle that? What should you do? And do you have liability concerns about those vendors?
Well, I think that's a reasonable concern, and so I would have conversations with all of those folks, and say, look, we take this very seriously, and here are our requirements for you to operate in our facility, and we want you to sign this. We want you to indemnify us if you're not complying with this, and I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. And again, I think it goes back to communication and making sure that, if you just call up your vendor and say, hey, are you guys compliant with the COVID requirements? And they say, yeah, you may have different expectations of what what it is to comply. And so you want to make sure you have, hey, what is your if it's again, going with the wedding reception, if it's the bartender or the caterer, okay, what are you doing? Are you plating all of the dinners? Are you using disposable cups? What are you doing to comply with the various, with the various requirements? And having that conversation, and then having something that you sign to say, before you can have an event, Mr. Smith, you're going to have your daughter's wedding reception here. Here are our rules under the new normal. Here are our rules. We want you to sign off on this. I think that would be my response to that.
I forgot to hit unmute. From time to time, I will not do the tech right, Alan. And so I think, okay, I'm unmuted, and Amy's screaming at me right now. Do a better job, Brian. So, okay, I think we've got time for a few more questions.
I thought you would have like an army of people over there.
Yeah, it is army of one, right? Army of one out here. And actually, our producer at Waddell and Associates, so pro, she handles so much of this stuff for us. So I think we got time for two more. But maybe three. I want to go a little over, closer to the top of the hour, Alan, because we're getting a lot of great feedback. And all you smart Alex that are still sending me questions via text right now instead of using the Q&A thing, I know you're messing with me and you think it's funny, and it's causing me to have a little bit of a panic attack right now. All right, so let's make another hypothetical. We're today, so you're open. There's a lot of concerns about if an employee, let's assume that you have the wedding hall again, like let's say we're doing the wedding reception, and you have employees, bringing dishes out and cooking and cleaning, and one employee gets it, bam. And the employer has a lot of options. They can shut everything down. They can furlough people. They can fire everyone because there's no work. I mean, there's all these exceptions. From a liability standpoint, if they stay open, and they say, employees, you got to keep working for whatever reason they got. If other employees get it, then are they liable? Once again, the law is causation, not liable. I know they can be sued, but what's their chances of actually being found liable, Alan, if other employees then catch it because they don't shut down? I mean, what's your advice here?
Well, I think employees are going to have one remedy, and that's the workers' compensation remedy. And again, I think it remains to be seen what the courts in Tennessee would do with that. Before this started, the law was, and I think it still is, that in order to have a workers' compensation claim based on contracting an illness at work, it has to be an illness that's connected to the work. So if you're an ICU nurse and you contract the virus while working, then you might have a workers' comp claim. In the scenario you just described, I'm not sure you do have a workers' comp claim. That's not going to stop people from filing them. Of course, the only thing that's really going to be an issue is if it's an extreme case of the coronavirus where you're hospitalized for an extended period of time. I mean, most people who get the coronavirus, heck, a lot of them are going to be asymptomatic. Some of them are going to be out for a week or two. And there are paid leave benefits, which we haven't talked about, which are very, very important. An employee who is out because they have the COVID, whether it's contracted on the job or not, is going to have a certain amount of leave that's paid. Or also, if you're large enough to be covered by the Family Medical Leave Act, you're going to have that leave. And so I think most of the overwhelming majority of those cases are going to be covered by that rather than liability. Now, question you talked about is, okay, I've got someone who's tested positive and I've got 10 other people that worked with them over the weekend at a wedding. Well, the first thing you should do is completely sanitize the location. You're going to want to go in and completely sanitize it, industrially do that. And then you've got a decision to make. Okay, I've got these 25 people. The health department is probably going to put them under a quarantine. And so that means that they're going to be out of pocket for 2 weeks. You're going to have to pay them a certain amount under the Families First Leave Act, which is the new federal law that mandates for the first time in American history that the employers have to pay paid leave. And so then if you're going to continue to operate, you may need to bring in temporary workers to do that. I think that's one of those things that the response is going to be unique to every business. It's going to be unique to every situation. And you're going to have to really think it all through. And it's an unfortunate, what you just described, whether it's at an event facility, an event venue, or an office, that's what I was talking about, the doomsday scenario I was talking about before. It's not so much, the ICU beds that the business person has to worry about, although we all ought to be concerned about that. For me, as a business owner, I'm worried about that scenario, is what happens if I have an employee test positive? Do I have to send everybody home? Do I have to shut down, if I've only got 10 people and I've got to send 10 people home because now they've all been quarantined? I'm lucky and I'm blessed in that most of my folks, well, all of my folks can work from home.
But Alan, let's
a lot of people can't.
If you can't have people work from home, and you got to have people there to operate, if one person gets it, what do? You just clean the place, get it, do your best, and if another person gets it, you just got to keep operating. Is that where we are?
Well, I think, as I say, I think one of the ramifications of that could be the Department of Health on their own may reach out, depending upon the circumstance, to the other employees and issue a stay-at-home order, a quarantine order for them personally.
Okay. So we've had other people talk about furloughs, and I would refer people back to the library. So on the Memphis Chamber has a website with all these resources and all these videos baked in with different topics. And we really got into that a little bit more in a couple other videos, and maybe Amy and Chandra can highlight that. We really baked that in. So I would encourage you to go back and watch some of those other videos, and we might be able to highlight which one did what, Amy. So I'm going to kind of look at your blanked out screen, Amy, and talk about sending that out.
I've got some 1 or 2 pagers that outline what the leaves are. If
my gosh. So Alan, thanks again for that service. So we're going to have this on the website, the chamber website. You can go in there and find all those resources. Alan has agreed to send that over. So we'll put that up so you can talk about these leaves, because I'm still getting questions about, what if an employee refuses to come back to work? Well, we answered that question a while back. Well, they lose their job. I mean, that's a requirement of job. They've got to be there. And so welcome back to the world. If a person refuses to come to work, they refuse to come to work. So the other thing is, to the extent that, are you recommending to your clients to have them sign indemnification and customers indemnification and waiver of rights right now with anything that pops up?
Not really with customers. I haven't had a client that needed to do that. I could see where a massage therapist might do that because you're assuming the risk, et cetera. I think the bigger thing is to make sure that if you've got other people coming in and out of your workspace, vendors, other third-party contractors, I would have them sign an agreement, maybe with an indemnification clause that says that they're going to abide by these work rules and they're going to be compliant if their own operations are separate and apart. I would do that.
Okay, so maybe for the employees, probably not for customers. 2 quick ones, and then I'm going to let you get on with your day. You've really been awesome to answer so much of this. So let's do the reverse for a second. What if you have a person that is potentially at risk because of their age, or maybe they have diabetes or some underlying health issue, and they want to come back, and you don't want them to? You don't want them getting sick. I mean, are you discriminating against them by refusing to let them come back?
Potentially. I think that is a situation that I would have a legal and I'd have a practical strategy for that. And I think most businesses probably have somebody in that category, and I don't think you can tell them what they can and can't risk. You have to provide them a safe environment, but I don't think you can discriminate against them because, well, I know you can't, because of their age. Say, well, you're over 65, you can't work. You've got diabetes, you can't come here and work. I think that's where you just have to treat them like anybody else. Now, I think then the question becomes, if they come to you and say, look, I'm over 65, I need a reasonable accommodation because I'm susceptible to this. That, to me, that's the harder question.
Oh, so they want to stay at home, but you want them to come back, and maybe you have to accommodation. And so, because age discrimination is a thing, and so maybe you have to looking to explore that. So, so we had kind of a funny issue, and Dottie posted this. It's kind of the same thing. So Dottie posted this question: if we rent space in buildings with other tenants, and we've been notified that we have to wear masks in public areas, and some of the other tenants may not want to do it, and you know, their staff is nervous about coming back. We have the same problem. We've got kind of 4 pods here, Alan, and we're rotating 1/3, about 10 to 12 people every day. So 1/3 of the team's coming in. And then we have a whole nother unit that can work from home for longer. And a lot of them don't want to come back. They're making buku of money. They're doing great, but they don't want to come back because they just don't want to come back. And this, like, I don't know when to separate fear versus not fear. And so the employees are nervous. They don't want to get sick. But I think we just talked about that. I just want to make sure there's no exception that if you're saying it's time to come back, I am sorry you're nervous, but we need you back as long as you're consistent. Is it kind of tough love at that point?
Well, again, you prepared everybody for this. I think it depends. It depends on the particular situation. But I mean, look, if you are one of those businesses where, hey, look, for business reasons, we got to have everybody here. All right, even though you might be able to work from home, but we want everybody here, then I think you're well within your rights to do that. I think a lot of businesses that I've talked to have, you know, as long as if 100% say I don't want to come back and you can accommodate that, then I think you make it optional if you can do that, because the practical reality is you got a lot of people in a lot of different places right now. You got some people that feel bulletproof and invisible, and they don't mind, you know, they don't mind going, they'd go to Neyland Stadium tomorrow with 100,000 people if they could. And then you got people that don't, you know, that don't want to leave their house because they're that worried about it. And, you know, I'm not here to say that either one of those people or anyone in between is right or wrong or anything else. But I think it would be a smart business person who would look at their workforce. And again, I think it's different if you got, you know, 300 people as if you got 30, to try to accommodate people's emotional state right now and make it as easy as possible if you can do that. And if you can't, then it's tough love, as you said. Then you got to say, this is the rule, and this is the rule we're sticking with, and I'm sorry that you're concerned about it. But, you know, throughout all of this, and, you know, my son's girlfriend is an ICU nurse, and, you know, at the end of March, you know, she had to get up every day and go into the hospital and deal and treat sick people and put herself exposed at risk. She didn't have to do that. That was her choice to do it. She wanted to work. And some people don't have any choice. They got to go support their families. So and I realize, and I've had this conversation with employees who say, but I just don't want to do it. I understand you don't want to do it. That's unfortunate. But this is our reality, and we can't change the reality, which is you got to either go back to work, or you got to choose not working because you value your health and you think that's the thing to do for your health. But this is the ramification for not doing that.
Yeah. So
there are very few easy answers for anybody in all of this.
Well, Alan, I got several great takeaways. One, I want to thank you so much for everything you've done for the city of Memphis and to take time out of your life to go advise our mayor for 4 years. To your law firm's downtown, Crone and Associates, people can find you. Thanks for sharing with us with that document we'll put on the website. Really appreciate that. Didn't have time to get to all the questions. Hopefully a lot of that information is on the website, everybody. So I would encourage you to go find that library of content that the chamber has built so that you can really learn a lot. And if you're not a chamber member, wow, we could use you. We need chamber members out there. So let's sign up if you're getting content and spread this around a little bit. Next week, Alan, we've got Cigna coming on, and Tunja and Amy Daniels. I was kind of busy this past week, so I didn't have time to bake out with them what the next session would be, but this is awesome. Cigna Health is going to talk to us about mental health recognition and response. They're going to really focus on like the stressors and mental health wellness. So if you breach the legal stuff you were talking about with good mental health, because you need your team to perform and be mentally challenged, we're all trying to balance those. But the big takeaway I've got is be consistent with your rules and your policies across the board. So be consistent, everyone. Don't pick and choose how you're going to enforce the rules. But if you need people to come back, you can do that now as long as you're consistent. So, Alan, thank you. Thanks again, iBank, for putting this on, Waddell in the chamber. And we'll see you again next Thursday, high noon, for Cigna. Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Bye, everybody.